welcome to Talks from My Bedroom Floor. Today I was reading through the end of Second Samuel, which is exciting because Samuel was long. It was a lot of information. So, um, I didn't. It was kind of a. It was 23 and 24, so nothing too long, but it's kind of a big deal because it's kind of the end of what's the end of Samuel. So, kind of backing it up a little bit. Chapter 23 says these are the last words of David. Important to kind of note. And so, kind of the big things that I got out of it were really in this, the first kind of tiny section. I thought it was just really cool to declaration of David, son of Jesse, declaration of the man raised on high, the one anointed by the God of Jacob. This is the most delightful of Israel's songs. Spirit of the Lord spoke through me, the word was on my tongue. The God of Israel spoke, the rock of Israel said to me, the one who rules the people with justice, who rules in the fear of God, is like a morning light when the sun rises on a cloudless morning, the glisten of rain on sprouting grass. And so I think it's just really cool to imagine like David it's chosen by God, and I think that description is really cool. It's very elegant. It's very powerful. It's very much like it's one of those things. It's like it's hard to imagine, I guess, like actually trying to picture like God specifically choosing, um, and like all the I like the image of like all the the image in my head is like in Avatar: The Last Airbender when they're in the like when he enters the Avatar state and there's all the like giant line of avatars behind him, and I'm picturing all the like men in his family line that God has chosen and specifically allowed to be in that line. You know that God was there through all of them, and allowed all of them to be part of that story leading up to his life, which is really and eventually, and all of us have that. We have a long list of people who we don't know, who are part of our story because they came before us. So I just thought that was really cool. I also think that having the idea with uh, the one who rules with the people with justice, who rules in the fear of God, and saying the idea of like what does it mean to be a godly leader, um, and basically saying like a godly leader is going to be a good leader, kind of like a breath of fresh air and uh, kind of a light, kind of like this morning light, and I think that's just really cool. Um, and then the next part where it's like, is it not true my how? Is it not true my house is with God? For he has established a permanent covenant with me, ordered and secured in every detail. Will he not bring about my whole salvation and my every desire? And talking about, I mean, faith really, and is it not true my house is with God? And that like it just is. It gets to be that. Through Jesus we get to have a house with God, which is kind of crazy, and like my mind has a hard time even thinking about what that is. But establishing that permanent covenant and remembering that's a promise, that I don't want to break. Right? I don't want to. If I've been promised something, I don't want to. I don't want to dishonor it. You know. Um, and then there's a whole thing about David's warriors doing some great stuff. I was a little bit confused. Gonna be honest, there were a lot of names. They did a lot of stuff. But there is the part where David talks. David's like, "Oh, I'm thirsty." So some of his men are like, "I need." We'll get him something to drink, and then um, David says, "Lord, I would never do such a thing. Is this not the blood of men who risked their lives. So he refused to drink it. Um, Instead, he pours it out to the Lord. So he basically, he's like, he's in a stronghold at the Philistine garrison in Bethlehem. And so he's like, they've been here. They've been like ready to go, but then he's like dying of thirst. And so his men are willing to risk themselves for him, which is a great example of, having godly leadership leads men to step out and push themselves, right? And anybody, right? It leads all of us to go out there and be willing to face things that we wouldn't normally face. And David acknowledges that. He goes, this is like, these men have done something great, but it's their safety and who they are matters, and what God is doing for us matters more. I think that that's just um, an interesting piece. It's also kind of why it's kind of wild, like, but it's the idea of, I mean, fasting and saying God is providing, and these men have risked their lives, and their blood I do not want on my hands. And seeing that, like, that sacrifice of these men, is not worth it. That God is in control, and when you are a leader, you have to think about these things, right? It's like, they could have been seriously hurt, and so who we're going to go to is, we're going to thank God for allowing them to be safe, but also to lead us and continue leading us through as we go through, and that idea of fasting, which, like, I feel like I should fast. I don't often. I feel like that's the whole point of fasting, is I don't, because I'm like, oh well, I'm hungry. But that's literally the whole point, is to deny yourself and spend some time with God, and so that's on my mind. It's on my mind, on my to-do list, but I need to be, what was that? Anyways, diligent. And then this last one, I've heard the story a ton of times, and it's kind of wild, but so God tells him to have a military census. And basically David, instead of, like, what the God tells him, go count the people of Israel and Judah. So David, when he hears people, he goes, go through all the tribes of Judah from Dan to Beersheba, and register the troops so I can know their number. He didn't, may the Lord your God multiply the troops of 100,000 more. So when he heard people, he said, men who can fight, which God sees, and he goes, no, that's not what we're doing here. I didn't ask you to count the men who can fight for you, so that I'm not asking you to take a census so that you can see how strong you are, how mighty you are, how big your army is. Doing this, so you know see your flock, basically, as a king. At least that's part of it, right? The whole book of Numbers, we get a count. So you have an idea of the amount of people, you have the need of people, where people are. You can be a better leader when you know where people are, who they are, where they're from. And then just knowing where your flock is, you have to see the responsibility as a leader. But But instead, David goes, I'm going to just focus on the troops and see how strong we are and how tough we are. And that's what I care about, is the men who can fight. We don't care about the younger people and the people who are old enough, the women, the children, the men who can't fight, all that. And so that is the problem. And there's a consequence for it. And what we see here is that there's the consequence. Now, it's also important to note that, I mean, throughout the entirety of Samuel and the Old Testament, we're introduced to the fact that the Israelites don't always do the right things, right? Every human being that has ever lived, other than Jesus, has messed up big time. So we all deserve some bad punishment. That's for sure. That's important to recognize when you read this next part, because it's easy to go like, why did God punish these people who were seemingly innocent for David's crimes? Well, for one, they weren't innocent. God is just, and so the assumption that they're innocent would be incorrect, because we don't know what the people have been doing, but I mean, the entirety of leading up to this, we see the thing with Absalom, and we know that there's infighting between the tribes and the different groups of people, and how they're all dividing, and how Judah and Israel are separate, and they have to be brought together, but then they're going to separate again. And so you see and this carving of idols, and you see a whole bunch of other, basically, they're not innocent people. All of us are jacked up. And so God says there will be punishment. And part of the punishment is that you, as the leader, have to make a decision on their punishment. Which is an interesting thing, because David has to decide the punishment for his people. Basically, he has to say, what is the consequence that what is the pain that you're willing to inflict because you've caused this? Your leadership has led to their downfall. So, what is it that they deserve? And it's heavy on David. So his choices are 3 years of famine come on your land, right? People are going to die from starvation. AKA, you as your leader are saying that you couldn't supply enough. That there are things out of your control. To flee from your foes 3 months while they pursue you. So that one's saying you can choose to run in fear for 3 months. Or to have a plague on your land 3 days. Which seems like it wouldn't be that bad, but also we see that it doesn't do serious damage. And so kind of this idea of like a plague just is illness. So are you going to have them not be able to be provided for? Are you going to put yourself in danger? Or are you going to allow people to become sick and die? All of those are awful. All of that is awful. And so David, he's scared of people. He says, I have great anxiety. Please let us fall into the Lord's hands, because his mercies are great. But don't let me fall into human hands. He knows that God will be with him. God will keep him going. But he doesn't trust people, which is people are scary. And so a plague is allowed. People are people become sick and die. And then, but this part isn't really interesting. The Lord relented concerning destruction and said to the angel who was destroying the people, "Enough, withdraw your hand now." The angel of the Lord was was then at the threshing floor of Araunah the Jebusite. David saw the angel striking the people. He said to the Lord, "Look, I'm the one who sinned. I'm the one who's done wrong. These sheep, what have they done? Please let your hand be against me and my father's family." And so David sees his flaw. He sees that in that line. I mean, constantly we see God being described as a shepherd. A lot of times because it's just a good metaphor. It's just a great metaphor, and it's relatable, especially at the time, especially because David himself was a shepherd first, right? It's just a shepherd boy, and so he understands the idea of like he was given this responsibility, and now his people are the ones who are paying the price, and he's at fault. And so he has to make penance for it. And so he goes and makes a sacrifice. And God stops. Because it says, "Then the Lord was receptive to prayer for the land, and the plague on Israel ended." So it did take David making the right choice and him stepping up, and God was receptive to the prayer, meaning that he can also be unreceptive. He goes, "What you I'm not just going to do whatever you ask and allow you to continue in your behavior. You have to recognize the problems that you're creating." Yeah, I just thought that was all very interesting. Like God is in control, and God can be there. God will be there when you need him, but he will also allow you to face your consequences. And until you can turn from those problems, you are going to continue to face the consequences. So that idea of justice, it's always a hard topic for me, but it is important to see that there is consequence, and especially as a leader, you have to be aware of that. It's fun to be like, oh, I want to be I think a lot of times now, at least over when I was growing up and stuff, I always feel like, or when I watch movies and stuff, it's like they're like, I want to be a CEO, I want to be a leader, and it's like being a leader means more sacrifice. It means more responsibility. It means more consequences. Which is why you need God, and that's why you need God to be leading you, especially as a leader, and regardless of what your position is, but especially as a leader, because you create an impact on other people, and other people will suffer. The people under you are the ones who suffer the consequences first. That's the whole thing. Is you, as the leader or as the boss, typically aren't the main one suffering the consequences. The first people who suffer the consequences are the people under you. And then you are. And then after that. And so until you can recognize what's happening because of you, I think it's just important to be wary. It's important to be wary. And know that it's responsibility and that God is giving you that responsibility. And so being responsible with it is important. But yeah, that's my little talk of this. And now I'm on to the next books.